Hello, everyone, and welcome to 1 in 6 Supports Friday group. We are a group of parents who help one another with resources and support. And we have many speakers in our speaker series. And today we have the wonderful member of our group, as well as a professional who works with Maines and Weinberg law firm. And today she's going to be talking about bullying. And I'm going to leave it to Emily to begin, and we're really grateful that you're here. She stepped in because the other lawyers had an emergency, and she, being the wonderful advocate she is, said she'll step in and talk to us today about bullying, which many of us unfortunately have real experience with our children, and we're eager to learn about the legalities of it and share our stories. So thank you, Emily.
Of course, of course. Hi, everybody. And I'll say that I did get notice of my need to step in fairly late last night. So you'll give me patience as I am not, as prepared as I would have been had I had a bit more lead time on this. But it's lovely to meet everybody here who I don't know and familiar faces online. As Alma said, I'm a member of the Friday group. I'm a local mom in Montclair. I have two kids in the district. One is in 8th grade and one is in 5th grade. My older son has an IEP for ADHD and anxiety. My little one was just diagnosed with some learning disability issues that I'm now grappling with, and was horribly bullied at various points as a younger elementary school student. So
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? We're asking everyone to remove their video because this is being recorded. Um, so it's going to be visually seen as well as audibly. So if everybody wants to do that. You're muted, I'm sorry. You talking to us? Can I do that? Here, speaker, make host, let's see.
put in waiting room.
He's saying he doesn't know how, so can you close him out?
Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right.
Nope.
Oh, you just did it and then you came back. Hold on. How do I get him out of there? Okay,
Stop video.
But that's for us, I
I don't
think.
think so.
No, stop video?
Yeah.
No, he's still there. Okay. Oops, no, I'm gonna remove him. Okay, there we go. All right, thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No, not at all.
Okay.
Okay, so back to where we were before, and I'll just say that for those that don't know, we're having an issue with one of the attendees' video still being on, so we're just trying to work that out and almost doing what she can.
Icon at the bottom. Is that for me or him? Video.
That's your video.
Yeah. Select account. Okay. Okay. You either want to remove yourself or
Can't stop video? Try stop video again.
stop video. Okay. Okay.
All right, let's see if that
works. All right.
Okay. Back to it. So in any event, also pleased to say that I helped co-found a group for ADHD issues on Facebook, which started right after the pandemic with another local mom, and we now have over 500 members.
Amazing.
So this is obviously a space that means a lot to me, and I'm grateful to be here. So I am an attorney. I've been practicing in the space of civil rights and social justice for over 25 years. Special education is not my original area of practice. I was, kind of a lawyering mom and got a lot of experience through my own kids. Civil rights includes bullying issues, and so I have been touching bullying on and off in my career and have been focusing on it more over the past year. I joined as a part-time attorney with Weinberg in October, and I'm spending a lot of time looking at bullying issues, more focusing on that area since I joined Weinberg. And it's been not surprising, but very sad to see how many kids with special needs are coming in, not just with the IEP and 504 issues that one would expect, but with really horrific bullying issues. And we're seeing it in particular with kids with ASD, but certainly many other disabilities our schools continue to be extremely undertrained, under overseen by the Department of Education. There's a panoply of problems in the system, and so I'm really sad to say that this is an area of law that I'm spending a lot of time in. So I want to just start out talking about what the laws are in this space so that we can be kind of on the same page. And also about the wording that we use, because the word bullying, in my view, was not the right word to use for the law that really controls here under the state law, which is the law against discrimination and also the anti-bullying law and the harassment, intimidation, and bullying requirements under the HIB law. So bullying is a term that we use kind of anecdotally as something that kind of refers to meanness, targeting a particular kid. Unfortunately, that is not what the law looks at. The law in New Jersey and federally looks at the membership of a child in a particular group and the concept that that child is being targeted because of a characteristic that they have, okay? So we have kids who are treated poorly for all sorts of reasons. I've had kids come to us who are being targeted because the kids in the class are just mean. That is unfortunately not what our law covers. There's two kind of areas that the school district can cover in terms of discipline. There's code of conduct, which are violations that just go to like meanness and bad behavior. And then there's HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So I want to be clear that we're not talking about bullying as a general term. We're talking about the targeting of a child because of their characteristics, which is specific to, in this case, our children with disabilities. Although there's certainly other ways that our kids can be bullied, and I want to be expansive as we talk about this because a child with a disability can be targeted because of their disability or because of their race and their disability, because of their gender and their disability, because of other characteristics. So in New Jersey, we have a very liberal, progressive law. Under the federal laws around how we're treated because of membership in a group, it's much more rigid. So race and gender and religion, etc. Those are called protected memberships in a protected. Sorry, we just had someone come in, so I got a little distracted. Hi, Robbie. A protected group. In New Jersey, it's much more expansive, and it can really be a range of characteristics. So, for example, how you look, your physical characteristics. I just had a case that made me look at a boy who's viewed as being too weak, not athletic enough, too wussy. That's something that our New Jersey law includes. And so we have to be really thoughtful about what we're talking about, but the targeting of a child because of their membership in a group or their characteristics is what the HIB law looks at, okay? So the other thing that I want to just say as to disability specifically is that your child, if they're targeted because of the perception of a disability, that is also covered under our law. So even if the child doesn't actually have a disability, but they're, believed to have, or the child who's bullying doesn't know the child has a disability, but perceives them to be a child with a disability, that is covered. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Okay, so the other requirements with respect to bullying, and I'm just going to kind of get through the legal parts of it first, is there has to be a substantial disruption. Okay, so it's not if it's just, like a day where someone's treated kind of not so nice, there actually has to be a substantial disruption. And it has to have like a real impact on the child. Okay. And that can be seen differently with each child, especially with our kids, right? Our kids don't always behave in the way that a non-disabled child would. And that might be for all sorts of reasons. Maybe they don't have the communicative capacities to relate what they're feeling or what happened to them. Maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about it because they just can't access their feelings in a way that the school district might expect a child who's been bullied to act. So, that's a very subjective question, how the child was impacted. And the district has to sort of look at a range of factors, okay? The other thing I wanted to flag is we think about bullying as being an in-school problem, but it's really something that's gone off the school grounds with the rise of bullying online and social media, off-school events that happen that have an effect on school. So anything that happens online that impacts school or at a location off grounds that impacts school is something the school has to be responsible for. So if there's, we're seeing this so often, it's just awful, a Snapchat where someone's made fun of and the Snapchat group is all the kids in school and then it's kids are talking about it the next day. Oh, did you see that Snapchat about so and so? Didn't we get him good? Suddenly that is a school problem, right? And so the schools can't say that's not our problem. The Snapchat is a parent problem. No, that is not the case. Um, One thing that we hear a lot is, oh, he didn't mean to do that. He didn't mean to target so and so because of their membership. He just didn't know better, or he doesn't know what that word means. He said, retard, but like he doesn't really know what that means. Intent is not a standard under our law. The schools think that is a standard. It is not. So it's what a reasonable person would perceive to be taken as targeting. Okay. So that's something I just wanted to throw out there. We talked about social media, which is just a huge problem these days. Okay. There are other, disability is going to be the main issue that we talk about today, but there's, as I said, other reasons why a child might be targeted, and sometimes we see that it's multiple. So a child who is ASD will suddenly be targeted, and then all their characteristics are sort of pointed out.
Everybody knows what ASD is, right?
Sorry, autism spectrum disorder. Yeah.
Okay.
So I talk about that only because I'm seeing so much bullying with our kids with autism spectrum disorder. They're perceived as different, even if the kids don't know why, but they're just seen as like off, or, not cool, or not able to kind of engage in the social banter that other kids are engaging in. And so what we're seeing is like a child who has ASD might be the target because of how they're acting. That's a little bit different, but suddenly all their characteristics are on the table. So, oh, you're so weak, you're such a baby, crybaby, right? Like, oh, you freak out all the time, you're a disruption. Like all those characteristics that maybe are associated suddenly become part of the bullying conversation. So I've had a kid who literally was like, oh, you crybaby, you just cry all the time. So that might not seem like a characteristic, right? The fact that you cry at school, but the perception is part of the ASD profile in the school. So you have to really drill down on what that characteristic is. And that's something that we see the schools are not doing. They don't understand the expansiveness of characteristic, of distinguishing characteristic under our law. They think it's just race and religion and gender. It's not. And so I'll be very honest with you. My child a couple of years ago was targeted. He has big ears. They're getting smaller as he gets bigger, but like as a little kid, they were pronounced. And kids were calling him big ears and making fun of him elephant ears, and nothing was being done. And I got in touch with the principal and I said, you do know that physical characteristics are part of the protected characteristics in the protected group in New Jersey. She did not know that. So that's something that I just have found with the school districts, that they're undertrained. Okay.
Did
So
she make a change?
did I make a
Did
change?
she make a change, the principal?
I'm going to reserve comment since we are being videoed, and I just want to,
To the recording.
Okay.
I'll tell you all about it after the recording.
It's the after party.
Yeah.
Let's just say
Bring us
it's
margaritas.
and I'll say this, and Robbie will know this about me, even as an attorney who knows the law, and I am not shy, it is very difficult to get this district to change because there's only so much logic they want to hear, right? I mean, you throw logic and they throw back other. So I think, this is part of why I feel so passionately about giving parents the knowledge and the networking. This is part of why we created the ADHD group and why Alma created the Friday group well before, we created the ADHD group, because without shared knowledge and without knowing what our rights are, we're totally sunk. Because even when you go in with knowing your rights, that's only going to get you so far. So we have to work together, and we have to, really pull resources to be able to speak as groups. So I will say that even knowing the law did not get me all that far with that particular experience. I will say my son is no longer at the school, so that's been something I was able to accomplish because I do have a sense of what the law is. Okay. So other areas that I just want to flag, with our female students who have disabilities, we're often seeing sexualization, sexual harassment, whether it's physical or verbal. This is a huge problem for particularly our female, but certainly our male students as well. And again, we're just hearing a lot of kids who have autism spectrum disorder getting teased. There's a lot of sexualization going on with our boys on boy. I'm gonna take you in the bathroom and dry hump you. I'm gonna do this to you. I mean, there's just a lot happening middle school, high school. And that raises issues under our state law, but it also raises issues under our federal law. So Title IX protects our kids against sexual harassment, against gender discrimination. It actually requires a set of responses that our state law doesn't require and our school district do not understand. So Title IX actually requires protective measures be taken when an allegation is made, and a separate sexual harassment Title IX investigation has to be done. So what do protective measures look like? The child can be moved. This is before the investigation is finished. Once it starts, the child can be moved so that they're not being exposed to the aggressor. There can be counseling provided right at the outset, monitoring to make sure the child's okay. That is something that the law is very clear about. Okay, so unfortunately, these confluence of bullying because of multiple characteristics is something we see all the time. Okay, so what do I want to say? What does the school have to do? Okay, so I'm going to speak about issues that I see all the time. So if you go to the principal or the teacher, okay, so there's three really ways that bullying can get reported. A child can say something to a teacher or anyone in the school, right? The teacher or the staff member can hear it or see it themselves, or a parent can bring to the attention of a staff member, right? Whenever a staff member at a school has any knowledge of an incident that could be bullying, and by bullying, again, I'm coming back to the targeting, not the mean kid stuff, but the targeting of a child because of their physical or some characteristic, that is an obligation that is statutory. They must report it. The staff member must report it. Within a day of learning of this information, it has to be reported. Okay, so that has to go to the principal. There is no question that that is a requirement under our HIB rules.
Even
So
if the parent does not want, if a parent reports it to a staff and the parent doesn't want them to take action and just wants to alert the school, they still have to report it.
Yeah.
So as parents, we have to be cautious about how we deal with it if we don't want that child, because there are situations where we might feel like I don't want disciplinary action taken for the kid. I want them to be spoken to.
Yeah.
And it happened with us that they had to do the
Yeah.
bullying report, even though I didn't want anything happening to the child.
Yeah.
I just wanted them to know and to
Yeah.
help the child. Like, you can't say, like, that's an inappropriate thing to say. They were like, that's bullying. We have to now, because you told me that and you use that word bullying, we now have to do this.
Yeah, and I want to unpack that because it is statutory, so the schools don't have a ton of discretion. I will say this, you don't have to use the word bullying.
Right.
Okay, that is another thing that we see all the time. The school districts think, oh, well, you didn't say the words bully, you didn't say the words HIB. No, the districts are obligated when they are aware of behavior that would constitute bullying under our HIB rules, they have to act on it. Okay, you don't have to. Yeah, please, Robbie.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna share a recent incident
Yeah.
actually that happened where my daughter received an email from someone she considered a friend. Basically saying that she was weird, that they want her to stay away, she makes them feel uncomfortable. And so when I got the email, I forwarded it to the counselor to say, hey, can we just discuss this? And I never heard back from the counselor. So I gave them a day, knowing everything that's going on in the district, and then I followed up and actually got in touch with the vice principal and said, oh, well, I have your attention. And she was already aware of it, and they had already brought the child in. So
Without
yeah,
talking to you.
right.
And
So
without-
at this point, I didn't realize that they would proactively take that action without speaking to me first, because I was afraid of the
Yes,
consequences.
retaliation.
Retaliation to my daughter, and so I just wanted to have the conversation first, and that didn't even happen. Like, they
Yeah.
just directly went into, and they framed it to that child because it was over email, that it was a system that flagged it, so
Yeah.
that it wasn't that my daughter or I said anything. But still, I was surprised because I would have thought the first point of contact would have been to me, but it was not. So
Makes sense.
yeah.
Parents are supposed to be, under the rules, notified if there is an HIB investigation opened involving their child, either as the victim or the aggressor. That is another area where we often don't see notifications being provided. I'm going to flag sort of common areas where we see problems. In that situation, Robbie, and I'm sorry that happened to your daughter, I will say that a lot of schools will miss that as being a potential bullying issue because there's no code words being used, right?
Right.
It's just, you're weird.
Right.
I don't want to sit with you. I don't want anything to do with you. That is a really typical daily, weekly, constant experience for our kids with disabilities that in cumulative impact clearly shows bullying, likely because of their disability, but the schools aren't looking at it that way. They're not taking the time to really recognize what that complaint means and what the basis of it is. They're not seeing the big picture of that child, okay, which is itself a problem. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of how that raises liability for schools.
Well, it also stigmatizes the child further, the way that it's dealt with, often inappropriately or really punitively, then stigmatizes the child with the disability
Yeah.
further because then they get bullied
Yes.
for being a tattletale.
Yes.
Or bullied for,
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And especially with our kids who just want to fit in, they just want to have friends, they want to be accepted. The idea of then turning around and tattling on the kids that they're trying to be accepted by is a huge weight to put on a child. And the amount of retaliation that we see happening is really significant.
Mhm.
And it's a huge problem. So I just want to acknowledge, like, this is an incredibly emotional experience. It's very layered because you're not just dealing with how your child is experiencing, hi, what is a very painful and traumatizing thing to have to go through, but then you're also interacting with a school district that may not be handling it properly, and other kids that aren't handling it properly, and then the parents who aren't handling it properly potentially. So, the dynamics that this creates for children is so complicated. And I also want to acknowledge that sometimes our kids are the ones that are viewed as the aggressor, right? And I know, Alma, this was something that you went through. And that's thorny in its own ways because just as Alma pointed out that the school districts are obligated statutorily to investigate and respond to instances of bullying, that doesn't change when the child who is viewed as the aggressor is a child with disability. It changes how the school should respond to that child, but it doesn't take away the school district's obligation to address the underlying experience of the victimized child. So this is even, in my view, one of the more complicated areas of the law to have to untangle and incredibly painful. So I want to talk just because that is sort of a separate question. I'm gonna get to that shortly. So what are the obligations of a district when they find out? Well, first of all, as we talked about, reporting is obligatory. So any school district employee that finds out about conduct that is or could be bullying must report it to the principal within a day. It must be investigated within 10 days. That's 10 school days. The parents have to be notified that an HIB investigation, that's what's called an HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, that an HIB investigation has been opened. Then once there is a finding, so the principal will be responsible for making a determination. Was the incident founded or unfounded? Unfounded doesn't mean it didn't happen. It means that they can't identify enough information to establish that it happened. They can't, it's not a proof issue, but like maybe it's he said, she said, maybe nobody heard it, right? Um, so there's 10 days for the principal to make a finding. That goes up to the superintendent, has to be in writing. The superintendent then has to report it to the board within a certain number of days. And I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly the number of days. That has to be addressed to the next board meeting in an executive session. The board has an opportunity to either affirm the superintendent's decision or reverse it. And then parents have appeal rights thereafter. And then you can go up to, that goes within the Department of Education administrative process. We see bullying cases go into court. And so that's that process. And then ultimately a school district can be held legally responsible for the failure to handle these processes appropriately. So I'm going to come back to that. As Alma said, there can be no retaliation against a child for making a bullying allegation, and that is regardless of whether it was founded or unfounded. So even if the child makes a report and it's not founded to be bullying, they can't be retaliated against for making use of their process to be, that is a process that's available to them by law, and they cannot be retaliated against for using that process. Okay. So assuming we have a founded bullying incident, okay? what is the obligation of the district from there? They have to respond in a reasonable way that's calculated to prevent the bullying from happening again. That is not a black and white concept. It is not clear cut at all. There's, a multitude of factors that we looked at as to whether a district acted appropriately, responsibly, reasonably, or not. Factors that we look at. So I'm going to go back to the child who is a child with disability, who is the quote unquote offender. What's reasonable to do to that child is going to be impacted by their disability. So that's where we care a lot about whether that child understood the implications of their actions, whether there was, whether this was a behavioral issue for them because of their disability. So as some of us know, whose kids who have had behavioral issues, a district cannot discipline a child with a disability in any serious way without looking at whether this was related to their disability. So if a child is acting out because they lack the impulse control, or they're repeating something that someone else said, oh, we hear this all the time. Go up to so and so and say X, right? Happens so often. Okay, so Alma's saying this is something she's familiar with. So if that was the experience, then a child can't be seriously disciplined because they're acting out of a manifestation of their disability. Okay, so that's something we look at. A child who is the victim, who has a disability, let's put that on that side. There has to be appropriate responses. That might be discipline. It might be counseling for the child who did the bullying. Alerting them to the consequences of what they did, alerting them to the legal requirements, right? The discipline then has to be graduated discipline, okay? So if the child does it once and they were counseled, for example, if they do it again, another counseling session is not an appropriate response because clearly the first one didn't stop the bullying. So you can't assume that a second bullying is going to be stopped by counseling. You have to take the next step, which might be detention. It might be notifying the parents. It might be, taking the child out of sports for a week. There's sort of a process that's not clear cut. It has to be based on that child's behavior. How severe was it? What's the age of the child? So a child who's 5 and says something horrible to one of our kids is not going to have a suspension, right? That's going to be a different response. You're going to really work on more of the counseling, the understanding, the emotional impacts for that child. If the child is a senior and this continues, absolutely suspensions, absolutely even expulsion at some point if this doesn't stop. The question is the school doing enough to stop the behavior? Okay. When we see school districts where there is a climate problem, that means there's a systemic problem, right? We see this a lot with racism, where school districts are just polluted with the bias, where there's so much happening that a child in the district is essentially experiencing a hostile environment because of the amount of bullying that they're experiencing. That can be true with kids with disabilities too. At some point when there's a climate problem, there must be a climate response. So just handling individual children on an individual basis is no longer reasonably calculated to stop the bullying. You have to start taking it to another level. So what does that look like? You're bringing in kids to assembly. You're training them about bias. You're bringing in sensitivity training. You're bringing in someone to explain to them what the laws are and what the consequences are, right? You're doing climate surveys. You're talking to parents. What are the problems here? I dealt with a school district recently. They brought in a prosecutor who came in and talked about what are the hate crime potential, what are the sexual offenses here. So you really have to address it at a systemic level. Maybe you're taking kids off of teams because suspensions and detention doesn't really affect that kid, but being benched for their soccer season might, right? So you really have to say, as a district, what's going to stop this? Okay.
Question?
Yeah, please.
Can you
Yeah.
just speak up so people online can hear you?
Sure, when it comes to the parent involvement, I have a question about if the parents are ever able to speak to the other parents. I guess my question about that is when you notice that the school isn't, in your opinion, addressing the
Yeah.
situation the way that you think it should really be addressed to resolve it, and you want to be aware of who the other parent is, and you try to contact,
Yeah.
let's say, the school, and you're told, well, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
have that information.
Yeah.
Is that legal?
Yes, so there
Can you
is.
just repeat the?
Yes, sorry. So the question is, if a
Okay.
parent, which I think is a very, very human and appropriate and very parental response. I'd like to speak with the other family for whatever reason. Maybe it's that they're, you just want to make sure they know about it. Maybe you know that family and or you suspect it's a family that you do know and you want to have a dialogue, right? The school district has all sorts of confidentiality obligations within the HIV process. So unfortunately, you as a parent, assuming your child is a victim, should not know as a result of the school telling you, right? You might know through your own child,
Yeah.
but the school cannot give you information about that other child. They can't give you information about the identity of the child. They cannot give you information about what steps disciplinarily were taken against that child. They should tell you that there were disciplinary consequences, but they can't tell you against whom or what those were. Okay, so it's a pickle, right? But we hear all the time from parents who know because our kids tell us, or it's a small community, or the teachers maybe say something, or because you just know this is an ongoing problem with the same kid. And of course, it's Billy doing that because Billy's been doing it all year. Parents often want to reach out to other parents. Now, that's not really a legal lawyer question. As a parent, I totally appreciate why that might be a good thing. Sometimes the only thing that can really impact a child's behavior is the parent getting involved. So unfortunately, it's not a legal issue, but the only thing I can tell you is confidentiality wise, the school can't tell you who it is. Yeah, please.
I was again gonna share
Yeah.
a similar experience to Alma where my daughter was identified as the offender, and there was a hit brought against her. And again, it was a phone call that I got saying this is what happened. The parents came, they wanted to file a HIP report. I wasn't aware, they couldn't share the names of the parents. When you look at the definition of bullying, this clearly did not fall under that category. It was a one-time, a bad judgment. My daughter was just diagnosed with ADHD. She had, her challenge was impulse control. The girl was kind of kept coming at her, and she did something very inappropriate, which was spit in her face, which was horrible and unexcusable. But the action of filing a HIB report was not something that I felt should have been the go-to.
Right.
And I was not able to contact the parents to have a discussion. My daughter actually, when it was brought to my attention before finding out about the report, I actually had her sit down and write an apology letter to the girl. And then the parents contacted the school to go further with the HIB report. And again, they had the 10 days, but the principal, I guess, couldn't make a determination. So it got escalated to the superintendent, it got escalated to the Board of Education. I mean, this was an ongoing thing that lasted a couple of months, truthfully. And we were kind of left in the dark, not knowing, what our rights were, not being informed about what was going on. So we were, we consulted with a lawyer because we were afraid of what could happen here, because it's like this, when you look at this, this is not a case of bullying. It was a very poor decision on my daughter's part. It was wrong what she did, but there was other steps that should have been taken other than this. And we never had to contract the lawyer, but ultimately, I think just consulting with the lawyer and her sort of involvement with reaching out to someone in the district finally put an end to it. But that was after months of worrying and not knowing what was going to happen. So on the flip side too, I mean, it can work both ways.
Yeah.
So it's just important to be aware too of, what questions to ask. Cause at the time, this that phone call shocked me.
Yeah.
It picked me up off the floor, literally. Cause I was like, again, where my daughter even, but again, it was just an impulsive reaction. Not something she was known to do, right? I mean, this was the first time ever that she reacted or behaved in such a manner. And unfortunately, it was the wrong timing and the wrong person, because the parents felt that there was a need to escalate it much further than, in my opinion, it needed to be.
So Robbie, you had explained the situation to me a while back. So I remember you and I talked about it. And I think with your permission, I'd love to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. I brought it up.
Okay. So in my view, and I think my immediate reaction to you is that's not an HIB.
Right.
Might it have been a code of conduct violation, which is the school's disciplinary process? Absolutely, right? Spitting on another child, absolutely a disciplinary response by the school. But was it an HIB? Was the child that your daughter was engaging with targeted because of her characteristics, her distinguishing characteristics? Nothing you told me would suggest that that was even remotely a possibility in that scenario. I did not understand why the school district prolonged that. Um, it it really shocked me, especially since there's so many instances where they don't act on obvious HIB issues,
Right.
but yet suddenly your child with a disability is being, and your family's being subjected to months of what clearly seemed to lack any indicia of HIB conduct. So what are the indicia of HIB conduct? In that scenario, what did she say, right? Who was she targeting? Was there past, bad stuff going on between them that would suggest that your daughter was targeting a girl? No, right?
This is my, and not from my knowledge.
Right,
Not, I
right.
would have thought that they would have shared something like that to kind of justify the case.
Yeah,
but-
well, that should be the subject of their investigation over the course of that 10 days. They should be interviewing your child. They should be interviewing the other children. They should be interviewing the teachers. What was heard, what was saw, what did they see? But in your telling of that story, I failed to see any indicia of anything other than a disciplinary violation,
Right.
which legitimately your daughter would have to face. And then there's manifestation questions, right? I
Can you
want
explain about the manifestation, what
yeah.
that means to
So a
everyone?
child who is disabled, who has behavioral issues as a part of, so like one of my kids has a reading learning disability. So like he's not going to probably act out because of his disability, right? That's different. But my child who has ADHD does have impulse control issues. He does have anger. He does, kind of have that inability to self-regulate the way a neurotypical kid can self-regulate. So maybe he's being pushed and he just explodes and does something um, because he can't control his emotions. So we have to look at that child differently than we look at a child who has more typical regulation. So what does that child need in order to behave properly in the classroom? It's not going to be discipline. You can't discipline out a child's self-regulation challenges. What does that child need? That child needs behavioral support, right? That child needs potentially a functional assessment, functional behavioral assessment, perhaps bullying, a behavioral intervention plan of some sort, counseling, real, underpinnings of support. And if the district fails to provide that, then you have a FAPE or accommodation issue, right? Because that is something the child needs in order to be appropriately accommodated in the school and quite frankly to protect other kids as well. So if they're disciplining as opposed to supporting that child, that's discriminatory. It's also a potential FAPE issue, okay?
What's FAPE?
Oh, sorry.
You're too lawyery
I'm
for us.
sorry.
You're too lawyery.
So a free and appropriate public education is the right of every child with a disability who has an IEP. And when we say FAPE, it means that essentially your child isn't being provided the legal rights to which they're entitled in order to access their education. We have a question. Okay. Sorry, my glasses.
Want me to read it?
Collaborative games.
No, that's
Oh,
not it.
sorry.
Sorry.
Do families receive the HIB investigation report once it is complete? That is a great question, Susan. Amen. Thank you, Chloe. Okay. So it's a great question. So there's form documents that you are supposed to get. There's a letter to notify you that a HIB has been opened. That's if your child is either the victim or the aggressor. If your child's a witness, you're not going to get that. Your child can be called in. You're not going to necessarily know about that or be notified. Okay, what happens at the end of a HIB investigation? You get a letter that should tell you what the outcome is. It's founded, it's unfounded, okay? If your child is the alleged aggressor and there's a founded HIB, you can ask for the documents. There are a bunch of different responses. It's actually kind of a more complicated area of law than I thought it was when I first started looking at this. I got a case recently where the parents asked for the investigation documents and they got very little, and what they got was heavily redacted. So the district is supposed to be redacting anything that's called like a personal identifying, it's got a whole legal thing, but it's basically like names and anything that identifies the child. When you actually get something from the district, it's likely to be very little. And if you want to appeal it, it's really hard to appeal something if all you're getting is like a tiny little bit of information about why the finding was made. Unfortunately, the courts above have been very limited in what they're willing to allow a parent to seek from the district because these are considered sort of decision-making documents, investigative documents. And so you're supposed to get, something, but like they don't actually have to give you very much. So it's kind of more nuanced than it should be, but unfortunately that's where it is. I'm happy to talk more about that because it's actually super muddy in the law right now, and I was surprised when I actually dug into it.
Yeah, and the letter I received, which was that it was unfounded, that was it.
Yeah.
And after like
Months.
months of like stressing
Yeah.
and worrying and not having
Yeah.
information, it was just like, oh, and now it's.
So I wanna-
like,
So can I,
Amazing.
Like,
Yeah.
I want to
everyone
unpack that just
seemed to-
because I think
Yeah.
this is so important. When you are in a situation where either your child is the aggressor or the victim, again, put the focus on what is the distinguishing characteristic at issue. So if I know the attorney that you got involved, and she's fantastic. I'm guessing she went to the school district and said, "What's the distinguishing characteristic at issue?" And my guess is the answer was, "Huh?" Right? If your child is the victim, make sure you are articulating, if you can, a distinguishing characteristic when you're communicating with the school district. So, like when I was communicating with the principal at my son's school, I said, physical characteristics are protected under our law in New Jersey. Big ears are a physical characteristic. So you have to be super specific. My child is a child with a disability. I believe he's being targeted because of his disability, right? Using the words bullying, it's unfortunately just too vague. So I just think in that situation, if this were my child, I would have gone to the school and said, what's the distinguishing characteristic? Are you sure there is one? Or is this just a matter of like a violation of disciplinary rules?
Right.
So,
and it gets more complicated when both parties feel like they are the victim, and that's where it gets very complicated. Because in our situation, there were some girls who were definitely targeting him because of his disability.
yeah,
And then he responded with very inappropriate statements. So there was everybody thought that their kid was the victim,
yep,
but one of the kids had a disability.
yeah,
And we had to appeal, that situation because they did give my son, they said it was founded.
mhm,
And then I contacted the person who was in charge. I said, yes, he said these things, but he's got a significant disability with all sorts of features, lack of impulse control, and did not understand fully what he was saying. And they dropped it. And then the other side went ballistic
mhm.
on us and targeted our family and all sorts of things. And people who have been in this group know our situation. I won't get into the details here, but it's something that I'm so glad you're here talking about this and letting us know what our rights are, because I knew my rights, and that allowed me to go to the administration and say, how can you give him this report? It's
Yeah.
against the law. Like what he did is in line with his disability. And they dropped it, but even the person who made the decisions about him
They didn't know.
didn't
Yeah,
take that into account. And it's so important that these things be nipped in the bud, because our situation, honestly, this happened years ago, and it's still an issue in the
Yeah.
community, and it's still talked about. What my son did, it caused such stigmatization of my son and our family, even though we did what was legally allowed.
yeah,
And it's just, we need to know our rights as parents, because
yeah.
it can just
Because your district doesn't. I mean,
the
that's
district
really,
doesn't.
they
I
really
hate
don't.
to say it,
They really don't.
but
I mean,
that's the case.
I know I'm on video, but I'm going to just say, in my experience, the district doesn't. But I will also say, for those of you that attended the town hall in July, when Superintendent Turner first came to our district and was starting to learn all of our many warts, she said, and this is on video, that she thought that our district had too little training, not enough policy, not enough procedure in place with respect to bullying. There's pending litigation going on against this district for bullying issues. And so I'm just saying what she said, because in my experience, the training isn't there, the policies aren't being enforced, the procedures aren't there. And the result is that most people I've interacted with do not have a clear enough understanding of what the parameters of this law are.
Yeah.
And it's a huge problem. And Alma, like, I just want to reiterate, our children can be found to have violated the HIB law and to have founded HIBs against them. The fact that they don't understand the consequences of their action or can't control themselves, their impulse control, does not mean that they can't have a HIB against them. What it means is how the district responds to that child must be different. Disciplining that child is not likely to be appropriate.
Yes.
It may be, I'm not saying it's never appropriate, but there must be a behavioral support response first. If there isn't, that is a FAPE accommodations problem, because your child needs that support in order to have the ability to access their education appropriately, right? So
And
like,
that's a district issue
Yeah.
that the parents can't control because their children are in school. And we can't control our
Right,
children
right.
when our children are in school. So it's on,
Yeah.
it's the responsibility of the school to take these things seriously
absolutely.
and to deal with it appropriately. And when a school doesn't, that's where it gets extremely
Yeah.
muddled and extremely very, very
Painful,
complicated
very
and painful.
very
and
painful. And I will also say this, and this has been my experience with this district overall, and I'm not just saying in the bullying context. When you bring to this district the logic, right? The law, what's right, and and you're not saying what they want you to hear, what they want you to say, or what they believe to be true, even if they're wrong. The amount of hostility that sometimes comes back to us as parents is overwhelming, right? And I don't want to throw around the word retaliation, because I don't know that it's always retaliatory, although factually it might feel that way, and I think sometimes it is. What it is just a profound lack of training. And so they think we're the ones that are pains in the asses. I mean, I will say this to anyone's face in this district. I am not a pain in the ass. I know my child's rights, and I'm not going to sit here and talk to you in a way that doesn't reflect that I know my child's rights. So this is the problem we have, because how we're received by our district is impacted by the lack of knowledge of the people that we're interacting with. And that makes it escalated.
Yes.
It creates hostility. It breaks down the functionality of our relationships with the people that are educating our kids.
Absolutely.
And that is a huge problem in this
Absolutely.
district, in bullying, but also in special education generally. Yeah, please.
How does our district compare in that regard to other districts around us? I mean,
On bullying, I will say,
Repeat that just so
yeah,
people-
how does this district compare to other districts? I will say that that more often than not, the districts get it wrong on bullying when it's not super obvious. Yeah, really, really problematic. However, I will also say, if you're interested, Google some allegations that have been made against our district over the past couple of years about not doing investigations, about burying the results of investigations.
oh, okay.
And I'm not saying that those are accurate, true allegations, but what I'm saying is there are allegations out there about our district that are kind of troubling and not necessarily true of allegations we see from other districts, right? So there's a difference between, I don't really have people who know how to do a proper investigation, super common. I don't really know how to recognize an HIB that isn't super obvious, very common. But if you're talking about not about burying documents, about trying to influence the outcome of an investigation, that's concerning. So I can't speak to whether that's true or not, but some of the allegations out there are concerning. So I want to, because we have only a few minutes, I want to talk quickly about you have a question? Go ahead.
I guess I was just thinking about behavioral interventions
Yeah.
in the sense of, if you're getting reports constantly that your child is having inappropriate behaviors,
Yeah.
and it's due to their diagnosis of autism,
Yeah.
and it's not that they're documenting it in the HIB form, but in a documentation of, okay, this is what happened today, this is what happened before, because I did ask as a parent for like ABC data, like what happened before, what happened after, right? So there's a lot of documentation. Where I'm going with this is, if I want for my child to get support, let's say in the summer, not at ESY, but like in a social skills camp, for example, because I think about proactive strategies, like what can we do to help my child, because they need help in this area. Is that something that legally I could try to fight for? Because I fought for other things, but I haven't been successful. But I know that if you're gonna constantly give me the issue, I like to figure out solutions.
Yeah.
And to me, this could be a solution in a sense of like a real way to support my son's behavior. Like,
Yeah.
how do we help him with his social skills, understanding space,
Yeah.
understanding blah, 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 whatever it is, not touching people
Yeah.
inappropriately. So I'm just wondering, like,
Yeah.
how could I legally argue for that and get the school district to pay for
Yeah.
something like
So I think what I'm hearing you say is outside services might be necessary in order to build the child's capacity to behave in a way that's more appropriate in school.
But we were asked to do that on our own dime.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. The reality is districts don't want to pay for things out of the school, outside the school, right? Sometimes they don't want to pay for things in the school.
Yeah.
So certainly getting something outside of the school is difficult. If it's a matter of a service that was both supposed to be provided and wasn't, then we're in a world of potential compensatory education. I'm happy to talk to you about that afterward. It's a little bit complicated, and it certainly goes outside the scope of the bullying question. Compensatory education is something that actually my child is receiving right now because his services were not provided in the school district. So it's not impossible, but it is often a fight.
So it's something that I'd want to get in the IEP.
Well, so the school is going to do nothing unless it's in your IEP, right? So that's number one. If it should have been in your IEP and never was, we can talk about how that could be legally problematic. But certainly if if a service is in your IEP and it wasn't provided, then we're in a world of potential compensatory education. Happy to talk to you about that afterward. I do want to just say, no, of course. And I do believe that the founding partner of the firm I'm working with, Manus Weinberg, is coming another time to talk. She had a death in the family. She is a, just encyclopedic knowledge person of all things special ed. So this is also something like she's a wizard at. So I'd really wish she were here, but I'm happy to talk to you about it afterward. Yeah. Okay, so school district liability. So there's the questions of like what standards our kids are being held to and what standard other kids are being held to. What happens when the school fails to do what it's supposed to do? At some point, the school is on the hook potentially for monetary damages. There's a case under the law against discrimination, which is our New Jersey controlling rule about discriminatory issues. It's called LW. You might hear about it sometimes. It was from 2007. It was the first case in New Jersey to establish that a school district can be liable in monetary damages and injunctive relief for the failure to respond appropriately to bullying. If you look up that case, my name is on it. It's a case that actually I did not originate, but I came in at the end as a baby lawyer. And so I always love pulling up that case when I have to reread it to see my name. It's something I've enjoyed taking having my name associated with, although I have very little responsibility for it other than coming at the end. And so those cases really are very fact intensive. It's very hard to make a claim as a pro se person unless it's so obvious that the district didn't do what it needed to do. The issue that came before the court in LW was a child who was gay and was targeted because of their sexual orientation for years. School did nothing. And it just went on and on and on and on. There were verbal, physical. The question is, did the school have knowledge of the bullying or constructive knowledge or should have had knowledge? Okay, so it's sort of like a, question of facts. And did they not take steps to reasonable steps to address that in order to prevent it? If the answer is they did not, then there is a monetary damages option, which sometimes is a deterrent impact, right? So like when I see a district that hasn't done what they want to do, sometimes I'll really, try to hope that they'll do the right thing by saying, well, you might have a law against discrimination violation here. So it can be sort of a lever to push. These are very tough cases to take into court. It's something that I am looking at doing for a client right now, actually two clients. So given that districts do it wrong so often, I'm not saying they're impossible cases at all. They're often quite accessible cases, but for someone without a lawyer, they're very difficult. As I said, there's kind of two approaches to stopping bullying in the school. There's sort of how you address the individual aggressor, but then there's also the climate issues, right? And so a school district has to really address those climate problems. And sometimes that gives rise to a problem under the law against discrimination. If there's just repeat issues of the same thing involving a lot of kids and it's not being addressed as an environmental bias issue, that can be a problem. One thing that came up with LW that has come up a bunch of times in our cases recently that I just want to flag is a child who denies doing what they did, right? So, like, my child's the victim, the child who is the aggressor is brought in. I never said that. And there's no witnesses. It's tough, right? Say that child is brought in as the aggressor 3 times, 4 times. At some point, the district can't just keep accepting as true that that child did nothing. They have to look at facts beyond that child's story and say, is there a problem here? And that's something that didn't happen in LW, and it doesn't happen enough with these districts. And the failure to look at other factors, so the same thing is being reported over and over and over again, you have to start taking that seriously. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there just because we're sort of out of time. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. It's a really painful area of the law. I will say that the trauma that kids who have been bullied show is very, very sad to see. I've seen it over and over again. I want to actually, before I stop, that I want to flag a case that I had forgotten about and just had cause to reread yesterday. Talks about how hard bullying is to stop at the high school level. So once you have a child who's been bullied by, especially by the same peer group over and over and over again, it's virtually impossible to stop that child from being bullied. The kids that are so cemented in their view of how they interact with your kid that it's almost impossible to protect them. And so there are claims to make about out of district placements at that point, right? And districts never want to do that, but
Although we were told,
Yeah.
we were offered out of district placement, being told that our kid was not going to be safe in the high school
Yeah.
because of what had
yeah.
happened.
So that's kind of the last piece of all of this, is at what point is your child, being treated so poorly? Is it such a hostile environment, so intractable that your child just cannot be safe emotionally or physically in the district? And at that point, the out of district placement becomes the conversation. Okay, my
Well,
mouth is dry.
thank you
I think
so
I've spoken
much.
enough.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who has been online. This has been incredibly enlightening and helpful. So thank you so much, Emily. This is really, this is
Yeah.
one for the ages, this presentation. So thank you so much. I think many of us will rewatch this over and over again to get all the info. So thank you. Does anybody online before we close have a question who did not get an opportunity to ask? No? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.